So we made those contacts and got that going. And this is all inclusive. This is Cindy and Ann in the office. This is Randy and Jose. This is myself, and communicating throughout the system. So the interesting thing was, touring the facilities, finding the Laredo culvert and the Ranchito culvert failures that caused the outage. Quite a lake built up there. Obviously the culvert was overwhelmed and plugged and did just exactly what I said, and eroded it out. The same thing happened on Ranchito. Determined that a 12-inch water main, which is right downstream of Central Tank, our main water tank, was broken. And it's not as easy as just having a water main break where everything is held together and all you do is shut it down, go out there with a backhoe, dig it up a little bit, put in a new piece of pipe, cover it over and leave. Because you've got your roads intact, everything's, there's nothing there. There's no road, there's no material. It's a different feel. It takes more coordination and thinking. So I got a picture, a good night picture from Randy of the hole after the water cleared out on Ranchito. And then the very next morning, I think at 7 o'clock, he sent me this other picture with the truck down in the same hole. Same viewpoint, just we added another challenge to that whole situation, somebody going around the barricades and landing in the hole. So these are the things that go on behind the scene. I know that's a lot of text, but it's important to understand that all of this stuff goes on out of this office and throughout the entire system. We did use our mapping system that we put together to identify the areas of effect and be able to identify the customers that were affected by the outage. Really helpful. Rather than having to individually identify and sit there with maps and try to pinpoint and pull that information together, we were able to quickly just highlight the area and get a report of who would be affected. You don't know exactly, but we had a pretty good indication that we had upwards of 250 homes that were potentially without water. Maintain constant communication with OES, and that occurred throughout the weekend as if the weekend didn't exist. And we had many conversations back and forth, coordinated volunteers with the Red Cross to give out water, got a hold of that water, and I'll talk a little bit more about what happened there, but we did make contact right away with County OES in both counties, because they were both declaring a local disaster that then goes to the state, and the state determines whether they're going to make funding available or whether the disaster is big enough that they have to bring in FEMA. You kind of like it when the state is the only one involved because the money comes faster and the requirements are less. When FEMA gets involved, it can take 1.5 years to get funding, unfortunately, with the environmental reviews and paperwork and everything else. So, but it looks like FEMA is involved in this. It exceeded the maximum that the state would ever be able to make available pretty quickly. Not just ours, but the damage throughout Mariposa and the damage separately throughout Tuolumne County, because it's different teams. We spent some time taking stuff off the website and adding stuff to the website to put messages out there, because one thing we were required to do is to put a message out there that the people that were affected by the water outage, when the water came back on, they were required to, it's a do not drink order. It used to be called a boil water order. But what they found is that some contaminants in drinking water don't come out when you boil it, only bacterial contamination. So you're not, a do not drink order is do not drink the water. Doesn't mean you can't touch it. Doesn't mean you can't give it to your animals. It doesn't mean you can't take a bath in it or flush your toilets. But you can't drink it. You can't use it in food preparation, okay? Doesn't mean that it's contaminated, It just means that there's the potential for contamination. So the first draft letter that I got from the state had a big header that said, your water's contaminated. Horrible. It took me probably 6 hours of back and forth to get a version of that notice that went out the first time. Because it was, the state wants you to give a generic notice that people are going to die if they come in contact with your water. They want people to be nervous about it. Right or wrong. That wasn't the case here. These lines blew out, broke apart, the dirt went down below them far before anything could ever happen to contaminate things. However, you know, we did have to be really careful. We had the answering service was involved because they were answering the phones when we were overwhelmed and after hours. Okay, so they were an extension of our staff. People were calling when they got home, hey, I heard this. I had to be in constant communication with them, making sure that they were passing along the right message and that they were consistently giving the same message. The Division of Drinking Water, I had typically about half-hour conversations with them in the morning every day and in the evening. And then we had to coordinate multiple water samplings and get those over to the lab and get that done, and then communicating internally about what was going on, and then communicating externally and trying to get the message on the web and being responsive to that. And I'll tell you, social media is your friend and your enemy. I have to appreciate ex-director Sult, and you too, Dan, when, you know, I got a call from you that was the first time I had heard that language used of, hey, is the water really contaminated and can we not touch it, and some of those other things you may not have said, but as soon as I got a phone with you, I realized people were saying it. What happened is that it caused people throughout the entire system to go to and get misinformation. They went to the off-site websites and off-site social media. They didn't go to the district social media, because the district social media said the same thing every time. They gave a different message every day, but it was a consistent message. The website, same way. They went to Don Pedro Talks and some other one, that aren't controlled by the district. In fact, I couldn't even comment on it until later in the day. I finally got accepted in to be able to comment. But meanwhile, I read all of these messages in there that were totally incorrect and were people's anger coming out, or just being, how some people can be malicious when they get on a certain path and they just continue to pursue it. Right or wrong, they don't fact check. Well, we hadn't even had any samples back yet. How could we possibly think the water was contaminated? Nobody has ever told anybody, don't touch the water, don't use it, don't let your animals have it. I had people calling me then constantly. Where do I take my animals? What do I do? Why aren't you providing water for the animals? They can't touch it. My child took a bath. What's going to happen to him? Well, so those are the kind of things that got out there, and that was a very difficult message to straighten out. I have to admit, the person who did the first post called me when I commented on her post on Facebook and said, your message is absolutely incorrect. This is the GM of, Lake Don Pedro, your message is absolutely incorrect, retract it, call me, blah, blah, blah. She did, she called me. And she said, well, I called the answering service, and I called them twice, and they told me this, and I called the answering service, and I talked to every single person that was at that answering service, and they all had the same message. Anyway, there were some lessons learned in this whole thing. I still don't believe that the answering service told them that the water was contaminated, because there was only a very short blurb that they were to give out, and that's do not drink, watch for notifications, given the website and all that. But really a lot of interesting dynamics here at play. for this. The interesting thing on that left picture, that's Laredo when the water went back down. Large culvert going through there, laying on top of the culvert is our water main, short sections of asbestos cement pipe. You can see an overhead picture looking from the other way on the shoulder of the road to see how it's offset. Basically, the pressure and velocity of the water and everything else just offset those joints and they blow out.
Pete, what did you replace the asbestos stuff with?
PVC.
Oh, you hook up to it?
Yeah. You just have to have a transition coupler because the outside diameter of the AC is larger than PVC for the same size pipe. So you can see there, there was a lot of considerations in putting that back together. Randy, I'm sorry, timing, if you had some pictures in between the break and the final fix on this, I wasn't able to get a hold of them before I...
Yeah, you got 4 or 5 more pictures in there.
Yeah, I had to, but we've got a whole slew of pictures of this, but basically, the pipe was put back together and then we had to have Nerds do some substantial backfill to get compaction and hold that pipe in place. Because obviously the road hadn't been put back together at that point.
Pete, I know it's a natural disaster, there's a culvert there, it didn't